Hello, and welcome to our lesson on reading and writing decimals. In order for you to read and write decimals, first you must know decimal place value. But before we get to decimal place value, I would just like to point out what a decimal point is. A decimal point is basically a dot separating a whole number from the fraction in decimal notation. Here are some examples of decimal points shown below. We have $1.55 and we have 3.2. Remember I said we need to review decimal place value. It's very similar to whole number place value. The only difference is to the right of your decimal point, you have to remember that those are parts. Anything to the left of your decimal point are whole numbers. So what I'm going to do is write a number inside of this chart, and then I'm going to read it the way it should be written, the way it should be. If you notice, to the left of the decimal point, you have the whole number 215. However, to the right of your decimal point, you have 023. And the easiest way to remember is the place value after the last digit is how you read it. What I mean when I say that is the way this number would be read is 215 and 23 thousandths. What I want you to notice is the very last digit there was a 3, and right above it I circled the thousandths. Well, let's talk about to the right of that decimal point. To the right of that decimal point, you would read that as 0 tenths, 2 hundredths, and 3 thousandths. I'm going to take the same number and write it over here. 215.023. Once again, the last digit, if you notice, you'll see the 3, but right above it, you'll see the thousandths. And when you're reading decimals, you always go with the last digit to the right of that decimal when you're giving a word to replace how you read it. 215. And if you notice, every time I come to the decimal point, I say the word and. Because the decimal point there represents and, it's separating your whole numbers and your parts. So that would be 215 and 23 thousandths. Now I'm just going to show you the exact same decimal number, which is 54.382, and from the chart that you just looked at, I show a tenths, I show a hundredths, a thousandths, a ones, and a tens. And I'm going to refer back just so you can get a quick view of the chart here. To the right of your decimal point, the very first digit is the tenths. The very next digit is the hundredths, and the very next is the thousandths. Well, I'm sure you already know if you were going to the left of that decimal point, you have your ones, tens, hundreds, thousandths, and so forth. What I want to give you is a little tip. When you're looking to the right of your decimal point, if you can think of the direct opposite of the left side, going to the right. The only thing is, to the right of your decimal point, there are no ones. You will start with your tenths, then your hundredths, and your thousandths. So let's try it. 54.382. We know that the tenths is a part, and it goes somewhere to the right of the decimal point. Would it be the 3, your 8, or your 2? Or think of tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And if that's the case, the underlined correct digit would be the 3. Let's try the next one. 54.382 again, and your hundredths place would be the 8. 3 is your tenths, 8 is your hundredths, and 2 is your thousandths. And with that being said, right underneath here, we know our 2 should be underlined because that is in the thousandths place. Over to the right here, the ones place. Now you know the place value. This is something you probably learned in 2nd or 3rd grade. No, I would say 1st grade. We know that that 4 in 54 is in the ones place, and we know that the 5 in 54 is in the tens. So at the top number, I'm going to underline my 4, and the bottom number, I'm going to underline my 5. Now I want you to identify place value in these numbers and read each number, just so that you can get some practice and get a little bit more comfortable with reading decimal numbers. When I look at the number, it is 17.093. The directions says for you to identify the underlined place value. Basically, they're wanting to know if it's a ones place value, tens, hundreds, or thousands, or if it's the tenths, hundreds, or thousands. Let's start with the first one. I see to the right of the decimal we have 0 tenths, 9 hundredths, and 3 thousandths. So the place value that is underlined here is the hundredths. That 9 is in the hundredths place. And of course, the way you would read that is 17 and 93 hundredths. Every time I come to the decimal point, instead of saying point now, I say the word and. The underlined digit in the next number after the decimal point is a 0, and that would be in your tenths place. So this one would be read 5 and 7 hundredths, because that 7 is in the hundredths place. Even though we identified that that 0 was in the tenths, when you're reading the number, it's always the last digit to the right in the reading process. The next number, our underlined digit, is in the, let's see, tenths, hundreds, thousands. That 8 is the 3rd digit, and it would be in the thousands place. Now let's read it. Remember, I said every time you see the decimal point, you say the word and. 0 and 368 thousandths. The very next number is 5872. Now we're looking at the underlined digit. The underlined digit is a 6, and this is to the left of the decimal point. We already know the place value there. We have the 6 in the ones and the 5 is in the tens. So that underlined digit would be the ones. And let's practice some reading. When we're reading, we have to identify the place value of the last digit to the right of the decimal point. The 8 is in the tenths, 7 is in the hundreds, 2 is in the thousands. Remember, the 2 is in the thousands, so that would be the last thing you would read when you're reading this decimal number. 56 and 872 thousandths. The next directions tell you to write the following numbers in either word form or standard form. The first number is 37.95. It is already written in standard form, so we need to write it in word form. So basically, they want you to write the words out of the number. We know, just from a little practice, that the way you would read this is 37 and 95 tenths hundredths. 30, 7, and 90, 5. Okay, we know that 5 is in the hundredths place. Okay, let's look at our next number. I see a 9.028. Remember, let's look at the digit, the 8, which is to the far right of the decimal point. And let's talk about the place value. The 0 is in the tenths place, the 2 is in the hundredths place, and the 8 is in the thousandths. So that would be 9 and 28 thousandths. And the way you would write it is the same way you read it. 9 and 28 thousandths. Now, the last number here is already written in word form, and now we need to write it in standard form. It is read 293 and 4/10. Well, we know the 293 is a whole number, so we can just write that out. We also know that the word and represents our decimal point, so we'll write that out. And 4/10. Our very first place value to the right of the decimal point is the tenths, so we would place a 4 there. Always look back at it, make sure you have reread it and wrote it correctly. 293, the decimal point represents and 4/10. And that is correct. That concludes our lesson on reading and writing decimals.